All right, next up is Ajuna. She has a lovely talk. Looking forward to it. Let's welcome Ajuna.
Cool. So I'm here to talk to you a little bit about learning from incidents, chatting you a little bit about what happens after things are done. I will make a lot of Marvel references. If you do not like Marvel, lunch is right after this. I'm happy to come and argue about what's better. I know I'm right though, so we'll see how that goes. Cool. So, one of my favorite things, I have a love hate relationship with endings. I really enjoy endings, but I actually find them very frustrating. The main reason for that is I'm most interested in a movie at the end. Some of that is storytelling, and I get what they're coming from, but the issue is that I want to know what happens. So, for example, in the first Avengers movie, aliens descend into New York. They have this catastrophe event, and they get the bad guys, resolve everything, but 80% of New York is basically rubble. And then they go and eat. And I'm like, I get it, after you've had a rough shift, it's like you want to chill, but also people don't have homes. What are we doing? What happens after this? And then they kind of pick things up from there. Thankfully, they did kind of pick this up a few movies later in Spider-Man Homecoming. The main premise of the movie is that this person becomes the villain of the movie, and they become that because they work on cleaning up what the events of that first Avengers movie, and they get fired because they realize that, hey, a special department should handle alien technology, and they end up using the remnants of that first incident movie for evil and kind of go off from there. And we definitely have had issues in technology where you build something, some sort of mega script to make sure that you can push to all your nodes at once. And someone's like, oh, this is really cool. And you're like, no, you were only supposed to use that in an incident. And that becomes something else. So I had a lot of connections that happened there. So I have a lot of connections between movies, Marvel, and just incidents overall. So if we think about incidents and kind of take a step back, this is the life cycle I imagine for incidents, right? This is an incident, an unplanned outage impacting your system. Usually some impact starts. Hopefully you find the right people, your system's paged the right team to kind of come and work on that. They realize this is an actual incident, so they declare it as such. They work on that incident. That is the hard part. I'm fluffing over that bit. That's the one that's probably burnt most of us in the room. And then you stop it impacting customers. You mark it as stable. You do a few more things, productionize the work that you've done, mark it as resolved, and then kind of do the follow-up bit, which is a post-incident report or post-mortem. And then you review it. A lot of remediation happens in there too. For most folks in the room, have you dealt with incident follow-up? Yeah, almost everybody. And I imagine that. A few of us, most of us will know the follow-up includes cleaning up immediate action items, capturing any relevant data, writing up and having that investigation, and kind of the follow-up work that comes from that. And as people who've done that work, we know why, but I'll go over it. A lot of this is continuous learning. We have a responsibility to ourselves and our customers to make sure that we learn as much from each incident because we didn't want it to happen. That's the unplanned bit, right? We want to know, okay, how did we, with our best of intentions, still have this incident happen, and how can we make sure similar things don't go wrong? We found out a new thing about our system, yay, but we hated finding it out this way, so let's not do that again. We also learn about coordination and working with other teams and becoming better engineers from that. But incidents remind us that we have to invest in our reliability. So you might have been pushing really hard for new features or making it easier to do releases, but incidents are kind of a reminder that, okay, let's take a step back and perhaps invest more in some areas that are kind of lacking. With that, there are best practices that come with this retrospective process, and we've heard of these, but I'll go over them really quickly. One of them is blamelessness, right? No one intentionally wants to have an outage or causes an outage, and if they do, we get rid of that bad actor as quickly as possible. We can chat more with the security people about that, but overall, we assume that everyone else who's there didn't intend it to happen, so it's blameless. We also have to assume ownership, right? A lot of teams work together and build up on systems together, and we have to decide who's going to work on what, especially after an incident. How do we make sure we're not duplicating efforts and work? There's a lot of collaboration and cooperation that goes there, right? We are all very important folks with different histories and specialities, and making sure that we use each parts of what everyone is good at to make it easier for us to move forward. The other part is time. I work at Datadog. One of the things that we say is we have to write our post-mortem at least the first draft within 5 days. It just makes it easier to capture that data because your graphs will not look the same after a while, right? You can't zoom in as much after a few days go by. You might have another instance. So kind of screenshotting, getting messages from the relevant IRC, Slack, Teams groups that you're using, kind of getting them all in one place makes that easier. At Datadog, we use Datadog for our incident management, which makes a few of those things a little bit easier because we have an automated system, but kind of pulling those things up. Sorry, this was supposed to scroll, but my bad. Kind of having it all in one place with severity, who was involved, makes our lives a little bit easier to automate that process. For folks who we've established a majority of the room have done post-incident reviews, retrospectives, who likes them? Okay, we have some shy hands, some very excited, like 5 people, but most people are like, not really a big fan. And I feel the same way. I think that we all know we should do them, but we mostly don't like doing them. And there's a good reason for that. That really comes up because you might have been burnt by an incident. And I'll spend some time talking about my first incident. When I was a baby SRE, I was very excited. I had joined a new team at a company I won't mention, but you can find out pretty easily. And we were working on virtualization. So my team provided virtual machines to other teams within our company to use either their personal machine or as their server. So if you haven't looked at virtualization before or for a while, what it looks like is usually you have a virtual machine that has its own operating system, and it is on top of a server that has all those virtual machines inside of them, worked with a hypervisor. It doesn't have to be VMware, I'm not sponsored. It can be any hypervisor, and that machine itself has an operating system. And it's on physical hardware or cloud, which my team had both. And we were working on updating the operating system for every single machine that we had, both physical and the virtual, which is a very difficult problem because, as you can see, the host operating system was easy for us, but the operating system of each of our virtual machines was very difficult. So I was given this project. It was a lot of communicating to people and sending emails and being like, hey, you have to update your virtual machine, and they just don't read your email. I don't know if you know that people don't read emails. So I was sending these out, and they were just like going somewhere and just like piling up, and no one was really reading them. So another concurrent project that we found out about later was that we did not have updated information of who owned what. So literally I was sending emails out into the abyss. But a great way to find out who owns something is to shut it down. So I shut it down, I just switched them off. And people were like, why did you do that? I was like, you're the right person. Okay, so you have to update your operating system. You have 2 months. And they're like, oh, okay. And most people were really cool. And for hours, we had systems in place to like shift all of our virtual machines to another host, update that operating system, and continue. We found out later the reason that we needed to do this by a particular deadline is because we had a vulnerability that impacted every operating system that was on our system that wasn't to a particular version. So we got to that deadline, and there were still like 5–10% of some very important systems that weren't up to date, but because of the vulnerability, my team was like, you're good, just get rid of them. And I was like, wonderful. Anyone who's worked on a migration, just getting rid of your long tail like that, amazing. I felt great. I'd sent my emails. I was like, I've done my due diligence. Let me get rid of these. And then an incident was declared, and they reached out to me and they're like, hey, what happened to our systems? And I was like, you remember I shut them down and told you? And they're like, no, we just saw you shut them down, so we just turned them back on ourselves. I was like, well, they're now deleted, so make a new one. Use best practices. You should have practiced disaster recovery and making sure you know how to start your operating systems from scratch. And they're like, we don't know how to do that. The person who spun this up left our team months ago. We don't know how to do that from scratch. I was like, that sounds like a problem. But they're like, get it back. I was like, I can't. That thing is gone. There's nothing I can do for you. And they're like, well, then that's your fault. And I was like, okay, we're in an incident now. It's over because there's nothing we can do. So the cleanup was easy because it was too clean, essentially. But I had all the data that I needed, right? I was like, hey, this is the emails that I sent you. I was sending them for 4 months. Here's what happened. And we were able to share that it was because of a vulnerability that was the meltdown specter. And then we had the remediation work. But immediately it was blameful, right? Like they sent me their incident report and it was like, Ajuna shut down our instances and that's why we're in trouble. And I was like, whoa, I just went through the training. We said that we don't do blame. Like what happened? Like I clearly did not mean to do this. But it became a whole thing. But then it was like, who's the owner here? They're like, give us another server. And I was like, here's a server with the same specs. And they're like, it doesn't work. And I was like, yeah, that's your responsibility. As the provider of this, I can give you the same server, but running it from scratch and building everything on it, I can't do that. And they had an issue with that, which from one perspective, I understand. If someone came in and deleted your server, you would be very mad at that person, and I was that person. But also, a lot of best practices failed to get here, right? Like their team member left, they didn't have any duplication of effort, they had a terrible bus factor, and hadn't done any disaster recovery, and here I come with the worst case scenario. So there was a lot of understanding that happened. First of all, my team stepped up immediately and was like, hey, if you want to blame, you have to blame the whole team because this was a project we were doing. But also, this was also on y'all. You had a lot of things that didn't go well. But the frustration was understood. I had to take a step back and understand from them as a customer, it was a very awful experience going through that. And that led me to start thinking about when do the things we learn to be true and have best practices kind of become culture, and how do we learn how to learn and kind of do the thing, right? Like I looked into learning, and I am not an educational person. I don't have an educational background other than just getting through college, as most folks do. So I don't know how to teach people to make things stick that well. So I went and looked into it. There's a theory. I put it in the little quotey thingies because some people hate the idea of it. But it says that the ways that we learn is we learn by first reading, then we start writing, then we start doing, then we start teaching, that we get more proficient at a topic as we go through these different levels of depth. So if we think about the incidents that we were talking about, I actually kind of lied by pointing it out as in a one-directional thing. It's kind of a loop, right? Each of our instances that we have feeds into the next one, and we are more knowledgeable and more jaded, but we'll talk about that. The burnout conversation was very helpful to have before this one, and it kind of just like goes around, right? We have to make sure that we learn from each one and pass that learning on to new people who join the team and make our systems better from it, right? I think the best systems are the ones that are just after an outage. Right after you fix it, your system is the best it'll ever be. There is a SRE book that Google wrote and put out. A lot of people have opinions on it. I'm not having a specific opinion, but if we think about the learning pyramid that I talked about, it's corroborated by this diagram from the book, which talks about accelerating SREs to be on call. If you haven't seen the book and you want to check it out, they have them for free online, or you can buy the physical book if that's who you are. But it talks about basically to become an SRE, to be on call, you start mostly by reading postmortems, maybe doing some documentation. So you're starting to write, you do some role play for disasters. That kind of gets you into the do. You start reverse engineering, breaking real things, fixing real things, shadowing on call. And then you become an SRE and you kind of become a mentor. So it kind of builds up on that thing of like, as we become more proficient and learn, then write, then do, then teach, we do get better at our goals. So right now, I don't work as an SRE anymore. I work as a developer advocate, and I don't learn as much as I used to by actively doing. So I'm back to my reading, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how you can learn from incidents even when you're not a part of them. And something I'd heard is that it's been 0 days since it was DNS, it's always DNS and all of these other things related to that. And I was like, that's funny. But then I was like, why do people keep thinking that? What is it about DNS? Networking isn't my background. I was more of an software engineering background. So I was like, let me learn about DNS. But we never make time to learn the things. So I was like, let me read up about an incident about DNS and see if that gives me some information about it. So 2 years ago, Facebook, Meta as a whole had a terrible networking outage. And this impacted me personally because I'm from Tanzania. If you're not in the US, WhatsApp is used by the majority of the world. Majority of the world, right? So Facebook was down for 6 hours, which was awful. But that's how you communicate to people, was doubly awful. I talked to my family back in Tanzania, and my mom hadn't texted me, and she had to send me an SMS, which was basically like her sending me a carrier pigeon to be like, hey, are you good? Because it's just like, I was like, how much did it cost you to send that SMS? But I didn't send it because I knew that would be even more expensive. So I like emailed her to be like, are we okay? And I'm like, everything's fine. But I was like, okay, what happened? Because this will give me some insight into networking. So I went and looked into it. I'm probably gonna say this in a very not as an experienced way. If there's a network engineer who worked at Facebook or learned about this and wants to talk to me about how to say it better, happy to chat. Enjoy learning. But essentially, how users interact with Facebook is through their points of presence, which connects to the backbone of their networking system in their data centers. And what happened for their outage is essentially, let me go back. Essentially, they had a routine check to see if all of their connections and their backbones are working correctly, and that check failed. And when it did fail, instead of just leaving everything as is, it dropped all of the connections. So all of their systems were up, but they couldn't talk to each other. And I had a really awesome GIF here, which was Eric Andre kind of struggling to be led into a building. If you can picture that GIF, do in your head. But the funny bit of me knowing people who worked at Facebook is they were locked out of their buildings, which I found very hilarious and was like, how did your system get so bad that your physical engineers can't access, one, just the building they go into for work, but two, the literal data centers that they need to get into to understand and solve this incident. But their network connects to everything, so there are machines that access their badges for entry also went down, so they couldn't get inside. So going back, they eventually were able to break into their own data centers and physically bring back up the backbone, which helped their DNS servers actually realize that the other servers existed in the world and kind of bring everything back up, because literally nothing was wrong except their backbone was down, which I was like, that's why DNS is so important, and that's why that matters. And that helped me learn a little bit about how networking works, especially how Facebook worked, and be like, okay, I should have multiple ways of contacting my family because I can't trust this organization. Jokes, they're actually really great. I'm still on WhatsApp. Other options really are not as good. But anyway, I enjoy learning from instant responders and learning from instant retrospectives. Finding one that is relative to your life becomes very interesting. Datadog had an incident earlier this year. I learned more about Datadog during that instant retrospective than I had had for the year and a half before, that I'd been at the company before it happened, because you learn about the thing that you need to focus on, but the other things that are interesting, we don't always get the time to do. So I find instant retrospectives to be a great time from that. So I want to learn about your incidents. So during lunch, come talk to me about your incidents or about anything else. I enjoy talking about all types of things. But to recap, incidents are hard, and working with people is also hard because computers and people are very different, but learning from them is equally important, and getting an opportunity to practice the things we know to be true so that when everything hits the fan, we actually can take a step back, have the empathy, and practice all the best practices we know is very helpful. Here is a quote that comes up when you do sudo. I learned that actually sudo borrowed this from Uncle Ben, not the other way around, that great power comes great responsibility, which I thought was very cool. But here we are at another ending, and I've tied it up into a bow, I hope. It was really awesome talking with you. My name is Ajuna Kyaruzi. I'm a senior SRE and DevOps advocate at Datadog. Here is my contact information if you want to come in contact with me, though I have just run from Ellie that I should get yours so that I can communicate with you. So happy to do that way too. But thank you so much.